episode 2 of The Dispatch. It is June 16th, 2022. And for those that were not here on the first episode, you can check that out on idodispatch.com or go to YouTube, Rumble, or Facebook, and you can see our previous and first episode. We did have an older show called The Recap, where we just kind of recapped previous stories that we had covered. We'll do some of that in this show as well, but we also wanted to expand out, try and do some unique videos, trying to do more interviews. I actually prefer to do interviews in person, but that's not always the case. And especially with the gas prices right now, running around and doing additional interviews with with folks is a little bit harder. So first, before we get too deep into the show, we want to thank our advertisers who spend a little bit extra to get their advertising here on our videos. And that would be Alex Kincaid Law, the Carl Felt Center, Prestige Property Management, and North End Real Estate. Thank you to all of them for being a supporter of the Idaho Dispatch. A lot of them do it just to help us out. They don't even care necessarily if they're getting a big ROI on their advertising with us. But we really appreciate their support, because without some of that advertising help, and of course without all of you who subscribe to the Idaho Dispatch, none of this would be possible. None of it would continue. I can promise you that. So with that, be sure to also go to idodispatch.com/subscribe and subscribe to the Idaho Dispatch today. And we'd love to have you guys on board. Our new goal now is 500 monthly subscribers by December 31st. Okay. And I think right now we're at about 370. So we've got a little ways to go. But I think we can get there despite the current circumstances we find ourselves in the economy. That's why we have it at $297 a month, in hopes that even that little amount people can do. We're going to be doing an interview tonight with future State Senator Scott Herndon, and we would appreciate you guys jumping in the chat. Feel free to ask some questions about maybe where Mr. Herndon stands. He won his primary and does not have a general election opponent, so you can't technically call him senator-elect, because something could happen between now and then, I guess. And so he is a future state senator as of right now. And feel free to jump in the chat and ask some questions if you guys have questions. And with that, let me jump over here and first remove some of these additional things. We'll go there. And with that, I will bring on Mr. Herndon. How are you tonight, sir?
I am doing very well, Greg. It's a pleasure to be on tonight with you.
Yes, well, thank you. I love doing in-person interviews, and that might be a little bit difficult. You're a little ways away up in northern Idaho, and so it probably cost me like $1,200 in gas or more to get up there to do an interview. So for now, we'll do a video interview.
It would take hundreds of dollars just to drive one of my trucks down to where you are right now. I think we're 400 miles away here in North Idaho, just south of Sandpoint.
Okay. Well, welcome, and thanks for joining us here on the Dispatch. We really appreciate it. And so I guess before we get too deep into maybe some of the policy issues that you want to work on when you officially become a state senator and start your first legislative session in 2023, January 2023, can you tell people a little bit about yourself, and then how you ultimately decided, hey, I'm going to run for state senate this year in the May primary, which is over now, and kind of talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So I live on 15 acres just south of Sandpoint, like I said, with my wife, Arlene, and we still have 7 children living at the house with us. We actually moved to North Idaho from the Golden State. I was doing some fundraisers we would have dinners, and I'd ask the people who were coming to my fundraising dinner, we'd sell it out, 100 to 120 people. How many have lived in the Golden State? And 90 to 95% of the people raised their hand. So apparently we have a lot of people in North Idaho, whether they've been here for 5 years, 10 years, or decades, that at some point lived in California. And I lived in California for some time. My wife was born there, but we moved to North Idaho in 2004. And I'm a home builder, so I build houses for a living. Right now we're building a really beautiful big house on Lake Pend Oreille, which is the largest natural lake in Idaho. We've got a lot of water up here. It's been raining a lot lately. And then I have been interested in politics since about 2015 is when I finally figured out I never had much hope in federal politics and the national government. But in 2015, I figured out that the states really have a lot of power. And so there's where a lot of our political hope lies, that the states, if they would assume their power on the federal government, then there's a lot, especially in a small state like Idaho, with only 1.8 million people. So I figured that out in 2015. I ran for state senate very briefly in 2018, and that was an open seat at the time. Sean Keogh had resigned. She had decided she was going to retire. She had been in the seat for 22 years for District 1 state senate. Jim Woodward ran at the time, Danielle Ahrens ran at the time, and I filed just before the filing deadline and made a 3-month effort at it and came in third place, no less. And Jim Woodward won that seat, but I went to the Republican State Party Convention that year. Before that, I'd never been involved in Republican Party politics. In fact, I had Heather Scott, one of our state representatives, asked me if I wanted to go to one of the Central Committee meetings. And I said, what is a Central Committee? I didn't even know what a county Central Committee was. You know, it sounded to me like a communist thing, a Central Committee. So, but in 2018, I went to the Republican Party Convention, and then I started running bills. I actually got 5 changes made to the Republican Party platform in 2018 at my very first convention, when I learned that as an alternate or delegate, you can submit platform changes. And then with several legislators in office that I knew, I started running legislation as a citizen in 2019. And in 2019, 2020, 2021, and now 2022, so over 4 legislative sessions, I wrote 13 bills. 2 of them were carried by Priscilla Giddings and were actually signed into law, and they actually passed unanimously. Even the Democrats voted for those 2 particular bills, and the governor signed them. And I've also had bills killed, put away in drawers, never heard at all, pass the House, get killed in the Senate. And that really showed me that the Senate was a big problem. And that's what led me this year to rerun for the Idaho State Senate District 1. And in this case, try to take out Jim Woodward, who was pretty firmly entrenched there after following Sean Keogh for all those years.
Yeah. Okay. Something I totally forgot to do. So before we get further into maybe some policy stuff, just for full disclosure to the folks watching, I am involved in a lawsuit, not with the Idaho Dispatch, but with the Idaho Second Amendment Alliance against the city of Sandpoint, of which Scott is one of the plaintiffs in that case. And so just full disclosure for the folks watching, in case you look up Scott Herndon and Greg Pruitt, you may find our names together in there for that lawsuit. So, okay, what was it like doing a, I mean, you did do a campaign fairly late in the game in 2018. What was it like running the campaign, and what was election night like?
So this time around, are you talking about this cycle, the 2022
this cycle,
primary? Yeah. So this time I decided a year ago. So in fact, it was over a year ago. I knew I was going to be targeting the May 2022 primary. Up here in North Idaho, if you win the primary, then as a Republican, you're going to win the general election in November. And in fact, no Democrat even filed for this seat for November. So I get a free pass in November as it is. But what I decided to do was I looked around at different legislative races in the state of Idaho. I learned, for example, that the average state legislative race spends $12,500 on their legislative effort. That's actually what I spent in 2018, just running really the last 6 weeks of the cycle in the May 15th primary in that year. So what I did was I started a year ago. I said, I'm going to want to take out this incumbent. It's going to be really hard to do because there's probably going to be a lot of money behind the incumbent. There are a lot of special interests that are going to want to keep him in office. We have a lot of Democrats that are going to cross over up here in District 1, and they're going to vote for him. So almost right away, there's a certain percentage of the voters up here. They're going to vote for Jim Woodward. And so I decided that I really wanted to run a professional campaign. So I actually hired a campaign consultant, a consulting company that this is all they do. They run campaigns. And the great news is that the consultant I actually hired a company that I really didn't like. We didn't really mesh personality. And then I found a consulting company that I really did like. We totally fit personality-wise. In the meantime, when I was kind of changing over from that first company to the second company, I figured out what I really wanted my whole brand to be. So I decided I really want to brand this. I really want to have a cohesive message. I want to have a strategy and a vision. And then they told me, and Young Americans for Liberty told me, and other people told me, Scott, your primary job is to raise money because we're going to need to get your message out to voters. So you're going to need to raise money. So then I took it very seriously and I raised a lot of money. So in fact, we raised up to this point over $100,000 and spent all of it in this race. And we were outspent by Jim Woodward. He spent $126,000 in this race. So there were incredible amounts of money spent just by the two candidate campaigns. And he had an out-of-state consultant, and I had an out-of-state consultant. But I loved our messaging. Our messaging was excellent. I built a lot of support, a big email list, and then raised a lot of money. And then we mailed a lot of mailers, did a lot of digital advertising, did phone banking. We did a lot of door knocking. We did robocalls, text messages. We did everything that you can do in a political campaign with really consistent messaging, and we prevailed by doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what are your thoughts on, I've been following Idaho politics for a long time and watched a lot of campaigns, and as you kind of mentioned, there's a lot more money being spent. I mean, in years past, if you spent $12,000 to $15,000, that was fairly common. The more expensive campaigns were like $30,000, right? And now there were multiple campaigns across the state that had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in a race. What do you say to people who are maybe like, hey, whoa, wait a minute here. There's way too much money getting involved because there was lots of PACs, obviously, that spent a lot of money in addition to the candidates, right? So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'll just give you an example. I know there were PACs spending money on my behalf. Idaho Freedom Political Action Committee. There was several others. I can't remember all the names. Citizens Alliance spent money on behalf of my campaign. Make Liberty Win spent money. They did phone calls. They sent mailers out in the district on behalf of me. I saw on Jim Woodward's side, the Idaho Prosperity Fund, according to the Idaho Capital Sun, it was reported that they spent $135,000 just to run TV for Jim Woodward. And that's one PAC for one state senator out of 105 legislators running for election. So if you look at the total amount of money just in our two campaigns spent by the candidates, you're already at 225. And then you had probably a couple 100,000 at least more spent on this race just for District 1 State Senate. So you probably had 400,000 plus, maybe 500,000, somewhere in that range of 400,000 to 500,000. But when you compare it to other states, interestingly enough, if you go to Pennsylvania, I've heard of state legislative races where candidates and PACs have spent over $1 million just for a state legislative seat. Texas is really common if you're going to run for the state legislature, and they're only in session every other year, to spend and have to raise and spend $250,000 to $500,000. I just looked at Indiana races where they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, $500,000 to another guy's $50,000, outspent 10 to 1. So for some reason, there is a lot of money involved in politics. And I guess you have to suggest that clearly people realize that where policy is going to change is at the state level. And it's every seat counts when it comes to that. Because we knew last year that the state Senate was horrible. We had a couple of good senators that would vote reliably, one that would actually fight for good policy, and the rest of it was really stale and mediocre at best. And so I guess there are interests that really want to get state legislators elected because they know it's going to make a difference. This is where we can win, is at the state level. It's where we can win policy. It's where we can win these races.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, you bring something up. And for those just tuning in, we're here today with future state senator Scott Herndon, who defeated Jim Woodward in the May primary. And we are talking about the election and kind of the money that involved in the elections. I mean, some of the states that you brought up, I guess I would say, are much more populated. And I guess, and maybe some of it is what you brought up, that people are shifting their focus away maybe from congressional stuff, which gets bogged down fairly quickly when the chambers are split. And even when they're not split like right now, they really don't shift very far. And instead focusing on state politics. But it's just an interesting shift to watch, as somebody, again, who you'd watch somebody spend 30,000 in a race, and you're like, oh man, that's a lot of money. And now we're talking, $500,000 in a race, in a state legislative race in Idaho. It's just kind of a different shift, I think, for a lot of people on the outside looking in.
Well, I can tell you when I started out, I had in mind that I would have to raise $30,000 to $50,000, and in my mind, that seemed like a lot of money.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I could probably do that. That's probably an amount I can raise. That seemed like a lot of money to spend on a state legislative effort. I wanted to make sure that I invested in the effort as well, but I didn't want to put all of our personal money into it. So I knew I was going to have to make a lot of phone calls and actually raise that. And then as I was starting to raise money, even people here in North Idaho that actually donated to my campaign told me, hey, Scott, don't aim so low. You can hit $75,000 or $100,000. And I remember when they told me that was very early in my fundraising cycle. And I thought, there's no way I'm going to raise that kind of money for, mainly because of the history of these state legislative races. Nobody had to spend anything like that before. So I didn't see any reason why you'd have to raise so much money. But then sure enough, once you get into the flow of raising money, it does become easy. And you figure out pretty quickly that if you have the money, you can use it effectively. And it does make a difference. Number one, we had higher voter turnout up here than the rest of the state. Boundary County was third in voter turnout of all the 44 counties, third highest at 47% voter turnout. The state average was 32.5%. And then Bonner County was 44%. They were seventh out of 44 counties. And I think because there was so much money in the race, people knew there was an election. They knew it was important. And so they turned out at a higher rate than historical average to vote. Because we used to run 32 to 35% voter turnout up here prior to this election cycle. And then boom, all of a sudden we jumped up to 44 to 47% between these two northern counties. So I think that's what made the difference.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Let's jump into some policy issues. And I did see one question. We'll get to that here in a few minutes. And if you guys have other questions for Mr. Herndon, be sure to let us know. We were happy to ask some questions, and he'd be happy to answer those, I assume. So let's talk about abortion, because I for those that don't know, you've been a very outspoken, activist, for lack of a better term, against abortion, and a pro-life individual. So, based on let's assume for a moment that Roe v. Wade is overturned. That's kind of the assumption everybody's going on. It could happen here in the next 10 days or so, 14 days. What, if anything, would you intend to propose, I guess, when you go into the Capitol in January 2023 in regard to abortion?
Great question. First of all, on the subject of Roe v. Wade, and really where I've been on abortion, this is one of the bills that I had written, and Heather Scott and Ron Nate and John Green, all Idaho State House representatives since 2019, had carried a piece of legislation for me in Boise for 4 years in a row, basically 4 sessions, like I said, 2019 through 2022. That bill was very simple. It was a page and 1/4, and it basically called on the state of Idaho to exercise its lawful and constitutional state sovereignty and ignore the United States Supreme Court Roe v. Wade opinion. I was surprised because I've done a lot of teaching about the Supreme Court. Over the years, they very rarely change course on really big opinions, big subject opinions. And they had not only issued the Roe opinion, but over the last 5 decades, they had issued 40 opinions on the subject of abortion, including as recently as 2020 in the June Medical Services case. And so I didn't see the Supreme Court changing at all regarding Roe v. Wade and reversing Roe v. Wade. So I had no idea that was even a possibility for them. Historically, it never mattered which president appointed which justices. They always seemed to respect precedent, which they call stare decisis. So this leak that we had a couple of months ago and the possibility that Roe v. Wade is going to be reversed is incredible and a great opportunity. And I did join an amicus brief last summer with Abolish Abortion Idaho, and also with there were 4 of our Idaho state legislators that joined that amicus that did actually call for the Supreme Court to reverse Roe, but also said if the Supreme Court didn't reverse Roe, that the state of Idaho was going to look at other options like ignoring Roe v. Wade and ignoring the Supreme Court. We were hoping in that amicus to send them the message that the states really want to assume power over this question. So now that if it gets reversed, so if this happens here in the next 2 weeks and we get the official opinion released, there's still work to be done. We have a trigger bill that's going to go into effect that was run by David Ripley a couple of years ago, was Senate Bill 1385, and it basically made most abortion illegal in the state of Idaho. However, notice I said it made most abortion illegal if Roe v. Wade gets overturned. So that's automatically going to go into effect 30 days after the Supreme Court opinion. However, it does not make all abortion illegal. For example, if the baby is conceived in rape or incest, then that mother could still go kill that child. And note that I said it's killing of a child. The question in my mind on this subject is, we have multiple inmates at the Idaho Department of Corrections that are serving life sentences for killing preborn children. And we've always had this exception in our homicide statute that says that mothers can hire abortion doctors to kill their own children. So we won't send her to prison, or we won't send the abortion doctor to prison. But if a guy goes and kills his pregnant wife, we're going to send him to prison. And what are we going to charge him with? Not for abortion and not for some other crime. It is a homicide, an illegal murdering of an innocent human being. That's where I think we need to get to. I think we need to have equal protection, equal treatment in the law. I don't think we want to say that in the one case, if this man murders his wife, we're going to charge him with a homicide for killing the preborn child that she was carrying. And in the other case, if she murders the same child, anybody involved in that murder is not subject to a homicide. That's not equal treatment under the law. Either the child is a human being with the same value as we all have, and we should thus treat their death the same in all cases, or they're not. And there would be no logic to banning any abortion. So I think we want to move our legislature and move the state of Idaho and the culture here to understand that this is a human rights issue, and that's where we need to get to. And so that would be the bill that I would run in the next session. The other thing that David Ripley's bill didn't cover is chemical abortions by mifepristone and mifepristone. It's the 2-drug combo. It's actually used in 42% of abortions in the state of Idaho. These days, the FDA allows mothers to receive those drugs by mail. They can go out of state to Washington, get the drug, come back in state, and kill their child in state. And David Ripley's bill is not going to touch that either. So again, on an equal treatment basis, a lot of abortions could still happen if David Ripley's trigger bill goes into effect upon Roe's reversal. And we need to continue the progress of getting state law to treat all preborn children equally, and all perpetrators of a crime against preborn children should be treated equally. Just equal treatment, equal protection.
Okay. So right now, I mean, the culture, even within the Republican Party, a lot of Republicans are like, hey, we don't support abortion, but if a woman is raped, how in the world are we going to send her to prison when she was raped by this individual? How are you planning or intending to try and shift that discussion to where a woman is also punished, even if she's raped, she's punished for having that abortion?
Yeah. So the key that I focus on, because I've heard people accuse people that hold to my position, because there are a lot of legislators that have introduced bills like my bill in 10 different states so far. Texas is one of them. Missouri is one of them. Indiana is one of them. So these equal protection bills, they'll get asked, are you saying that we are going to criminalize mothers, for example? And that's not what I'm saying at all, because we don't criminalize anybody. When we pass a criminal law, what we are doing is criminalizing an act or an offense. So we're saying if you do this act or offense, then you are subject to criminal prosecution. Nobody prior to the enactment of that law is going to be subject to criminal prosecution. Once that law goes into effect, they have full knowledge that there is this law in the books that they could be prosecuted for. And if they then go commit that crime, everybody who commits a crime knows that there's the possibility that if you get caught, you're going to be prosecuted for that. That's how the deterrent of the crime works. And so we're not talking about criminalizing mothers at all. But to really answer your main point, how do we go from where we are, where we allow rape conceived children, for example, to be killed? By the way, in Florida, they don't. In Texas, they don't. In those laws that they passed there. In Arkansas, they didn't allow rape conceived children to be thrown under the bus. We are over, I don't want to use the wrong words here, but we're not focusing on the right person. So when a mother is raped, she's the victim of a rape, right? If she conceives, she's now carrying the child conceived in rape. But in all cases, when you're dealing with homicide, you need to focus on the actual victim of the homicide. So an abortion kills a child. And so that's how we move the bar from where we are, where we make these rape exceptions right now. And we say, hey, look, it's not right to put to death the child for the crime of its father, even the alleged crime of its father, because that's what the law would currently allow. There's no rape proven. The guy hasn't been convicted. But because the mother alleges that she was raped, she's allowed to go kill the child. Well, we need to say that we don't want to put to death a child for the crime of its father. We don't want to commit an atrocity because a violent crime happened. You see what I'm saying? We don't want to commit a second crime just because the first crime happened. So we need to elevate the status of the baby. The focus should be on the baby and the baby's inherent right to life. It's Article 1, Section 1 of the Idaho Constitution. It's a God-given right. God's in control of conception and fertilization as far as in the big scheme of things. And so we need to respect his created order. And that's where we need to move everybody to, is elevating the place in this whole question of where the baby sits in this whole question.
Sure. Okay. One last question, I guess, on this topic, and then we could probably talk about this for all night, but we'll get to a number of other topics. What do you know in those other states that don't have that exception? Is there a punishment for the mother in those states if she does have an abortion? I've heard some people say, hey, if she goes through with an abortion of the child conceived in rape, then the murder is tacked on to the guy who raped her rather than on her.
Yeah. There have been proposals in some states that do. This is one of the big arguments in the pro-life movement. It's about split 50-50 right now. So when a lot of these laws are passed, sometimes the mothers are culpable civilly, not criminally. I don't know that any of it's been criminalized at this point. The big debate is, should mothers be culpable? Do they have culpability? And I say, if she kills her 1-year-old child, or if she kills her 6-day-old child, do we hold her culpable? If we do, then we need to move that bar back. And again, it's bringing everybody up to speed of focusing on, does this child have a natural right to life like everybody else? And if they do, then we need to go ahead and move that bar back and make people responsible for the crime perpetrated against the child. That's what's going to stop abortion in the state.
Okay. All right. Well, let's move on. So we've got a question here from Gary Hall. I assume you can see this, right? Okay.
I can, yeah.
For those that can, or maybe you're just listening, it says, hopefully you can get important bills up for a vote and passed. Why do we still have a grocery tax? This is another very big topic, especially right now. But even during this last session, there were people on both sides, right? Democrats and Republicans that were like, repeal the grocery tax. And there were some efforts done by Representative Ron Nate and others to do that. What, in your opinion, is the issue with getting the grocery tax back to the governor's desk where it's been previously and hasn't even really come close since then?
So I was shocked to learn during this last campaign cycle, the Idaho Freedom Action had put out information that Senator Jim Woodward, who I've now will be unseating, that he blocked Christy Zito's effort in the Senate. She tried to bring that grocery sales tax repeal to the Senate floor, and then they shut her down in the Senate. So they accused Jim Woodward, and this is the PAC accused Jim Woodward of not supporting grocery tax sales tax repeal. And I really didn't know where he stood on that issue. And then I was on a radio program with him where he admitted that he does not support grocery sales tax repeal. And this is why I suspect that this did not happen in the Idaho legislature this year. For some reason, there are some of those in power in Boise that do not want to repeal the grocery sales tax. Now, he gave a couple of reasons on the radio program. For example, he said that by having the grocery sales tax in place, He said that out-of-state people that are buying groceries in the state of Idaho, that we're accumulating revenue from those out-of-state people. Of course, I've heard that argument. But we're also looking at a $2 billion budget surplus at the moment in the state of Idaho. They're projecting, sales tax revenues, income tax revenues have been really high in the state of Idaho. They've been higher than expected. And so by the time we get into the next legislative session, they're saying we're going to have a $2 billion surplus. Grocery sales tax is a very small piece of that. So I don't know that we need, especially that even smaller piece of the pie, out of state people buying groceries in the state of Idaho. I don't think we need their grocery sales tax money. Now, but it showed me that there was opposition, a coordinated opposition in Boise that really doesn't want this to happen. Now, I'll tell you why I think it should happen. We have, for example, over in Old Town, Idaho, just west of me, we have Super One. And a few miles away, just across the border in Newport, Washington, we have Safeway. Those stores are literally 2 or 3 miles apart at the most. I don't even know that they're 2 miles apart. And in Washington state, there's no sales tax on groceries. And almost every state, there's no sales tax on groceries. We're one of the few states that have a sales tax on groceries. And at 6%, this is a major hit on people's weekly spending. They're living paycheck to paycheck. 6% on rising inflationary costs for food is very significant for a person living paycheck to paycheck. And this is not a revenue stream that's necessary to maintain the fiscal responsibility of the Idaho state government. However, it is money that is necessary for voters, for citizens in Idaho. They need it to buy food. Now, here's the other thing Jim suggested. He said, hey, look, the grocery sales tax credit is sufficient. You're going to get all your money back that you paid. If you're a resident in the state of Idaho, you're filing Idaho income taxes, you're going to get all that sales tax back. Well, in the case of my family, that's not true at all. I buy groceries for 9 people. We pay a lot more in grocery sales tax than we actually get back in grocery tax credit on our Idaho income tax return. And I am not a fan of giving an interest-free loan to my state government for the entire year because I paid the sales tax at the very beginning of the year and throughout the year, and I don't get the money back as a grocery tax credit until I file my income tax return a year later. I'm not interested in interest-free loans to my government. I'd rather keep the money. I think people should keep their money, and we should eliminate the grocery sales tax.
Okay. What are some of the other, let's go to one more question from the audience here, and then I've got a question for you. So this one, I don't know if I should ever read these names, but Tunnel Lord 1337. Would you vote yes on budget bills if you have no idea where that money is going?
Where that money is going. So there's going to be a whole bunch of openings on JFAC, which is the Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee. There's 11 openings on a 20-member committee. That's actually a committee I would be interested in being on. I honestly would hesitate to vote for appropriations bills. It's a large percentage of the bills that are handled by the Idaho legislature. All money spent in the state of Idaho by Idaho state government gets approved by the House and the Senate of the state of Idaho. I have a problem, number one, if I don't know where all the money's going, but also where's the money coming from? Because as it turns out, a lot of those appropriations bills were passing through, in many cases, federal money that's coming in. In fact, it turns out that we've gone from where 35% of Idaho quote revenues, so in other words, we have our revenues and we have our expenses in the state of Idaho. And it used to be that a third of Idaho revenues were coming from the federal government. So we're basically taking money from the federal government and we're spending it on programs in Idaho. And the Idaho legislature is involved in approving those appropriations by taking votes on those bills. And now we're up to 45%. 45% or 45 cents of every dollar spent by the state of Idaho is coming from the federal government. So it's coming from the federal government, it's given to Idaho, and the Idaho legislature has control over it, and we approve the expenditure of that money. A lot of that goes to a lot of unconstitutional programs. In other words, there are literally hundreds of agencies, boards, and different groups that are doing things in the state of Idaho that an individual Idaho legislator is probably, at the time they're approving an appropriation bill, has no idea where every single dollar is going. So I think there needs to be, frankly, a lot less government, honestly. And then that 45 cents on the dollar coming from the federal government is a real concern to me, because as it turns out, a significant portion of that is national debt money. So when you take in 45 cents of every dollar in Idaho, 45 cents of the dollars you're getting in from the federal government are borrowed from the national taxpayer, national debt created out of thin air. So when I say next session that we're going to have a $2 billion surplus, as it turns out, if you factor in the money that's coming into Idaho counted as revenues, and that is national debt financed, it turns out we actually don't have a surplus in Idaho. And so here we are, we're talking about let's eliminate the grocery sales tax, and we got to give some money back to the taxpayer. But as it turns out, we don't even have a surplus when you weigh the national money with the state money. It turns out we're in a slight deficit. And that's a real problem to me. And so how do you control that whole thing? Well, you really just have to greatly shrink the footprint of state government. And I wouldn't have a problem with that. And that would be a high priority of mine. If I had my way, that's where I would take the ship.
Okay. And that was, I guess my next question is, other than the abortion issue, now that you know you're going to be in the state capitol because you don't have a general election opponent, what are your other top priorities once you get inside the capitol?
I'd love to eliminate the property tax. So that's a major priority of mine. I actually think that the property tax at a couple of different levels is completely immoral. So we use property tax. Property tax is collected from your local taxing district. So I'm going to take Bonner County as an example. That's where I live. So Bonner County is a taxing district. So they're basically putting together budgets every year. The state legislature, so where I come in, has said that if there's a local taxing district, like an ambulance district, a fire district, a library district, a hospital district, we have all these things here in Bonner County, and they have a board, and they elect people. The voters elect people to their board, and then they create budgets every year. And the state legislature has said you can't grow your budget more than 3% a year. So we know that. So we've capped them at 3%. So the county budget can only go up 3% this year. And the way we're going to fund that is we're going to basically look at all of the real property in Bonner County. So this is how we fund it, through property taxes. So my house, let's say, is worth $100,000. It's worth a lot more than that now, according to the latest assessments. But we take this whole pie of the county budget and we divvy it up among all the property owners in Bonner County, and I have a piece of that pie, and now I have to give money to the county every year to provide for services. Well, we all want these services, but what I object to is how we fund them through property tax. Because the key problem with property tax is that you never then really own your property. So here I am sitting in my house right now. I don't have a mortgage on the house. We've never had a mortgage on this house. Yet I never really own the house because I'm under the threat of the sword of my local government, that if I don't pay them money every year based on the value of my property, they can come after my property. They can file a lien for lack of payment of these taxes on my property, so I don't truly own the property. And where this gets really critical is that if you're on a fixed income, you're in retirement, which if you look at the average age of people up here in Bonner and Boundary County, and the majority of people moving to this area, they're in their retirement years. A lot of these people are on fixed incomes. A lot of these people are only on Social Security. And so if their tax bill goes up even 3%, or let's say it doesn't go up 3%, but then the county comes by a couple years later and collects what are called foregone taxes, so it goes up 9%. Well, all of a sudden, these people are having a really hard time even staying in their home. So I would like to see the way we fund local services like the sheriff's office, county government, road and bridge, garbage collection, et cetera, move away from a property tax basis. And there was a bill this last legislative session that would have replaced property taxes for primary homeowners and replaced it with an increased sales tax. I would like to see something like that replace property taxes. If I could get that done in my tenure in the legislature, if that got accomplished, I would consider that a major accomplishment.
Okay. Maybe, I guess, as a follow-up to that, Gary asked, do you think you can get the support to bring a bill before the Senate to eliminate the property tax?
Well, I think so. I think we saw last year that the bill that was brought, there was a bill proposed last year. As it turns out, primary homeowner. So this is my primary residence. It's not my second home. It's not my third home. So there was a bill last year that proposed this very thing. So there was a bill filed. It was not progressed. The Senate wasn't going to hear it, and as it turns out too, a lot of the tax bills on the House side have been kind of funneled through. They all go through one committee, but then that chairman of that committee basically gets to say which policies get heard and which don't. And I think there's a little bit of a genesis of an idea. People are willing to talk about this. And now with the major change out of senators in the Idaho State Senate this year, we're going to see more than half of the Senate be new people in the 2023 session. Many of them are conservatives. Many of them like the idea of the elimination of property tax in favor of an increased sales tax or a consumption tax. I think we do have the genesis of the idea from last year, and we have the right people that are going to be there in 2023 on both the House side and the Senate side that we could move a bill forward next year. And as it turns out, to eliminate property tax for primary homeowners, you'd only have to raise the sales tax 1.1% to completely replace all of those local taxing district revenues. And so that's not bad. And so that would be, in my opinion, a great idea. And I do think we've got the right people that we could see movement on that in the Senate and in the House in the 2023 legislative session.
How would that, maybe some people have this question, how would that impact the local bonds and levies, right? That's a major topic of discussion as local districts. I mean, it's just bond after bond after bond, and some people get frustrated with that, and some people want those bonds to pass, and the property owners end up dealing with that themselves, where maybe obviously renters don't have to deal with that. So what are your thoughts on how that would impact potentially education, and where would that money shift to?
Right. So here we've got, in Bonner County, we've got a couple different school districts. So we have LPOSD, Lake Pend Oreille School District. We got West Bonner County School District. So those are two different agencies, basically. And West Bonner County runs their bonds, and they've had a lot of theirs defeated. That tends to be the more conservative side of our district. And then Lake Pend Oreille School District is centered pretty much in Sandpoint, in the rural areas right around Sandpoint. They've run levies every 2 years, plant and facilities levies, levies that pay for operations, and they've even done a permanent levy. So if you replace their revenue, so right now, school district is a great example, and levy is a great example. So on my tax bill, property tax bill, I'll currently see LPOSD, because that's the school district I'm in, and I'm also going to see their levy rates on my tax bill as well, which is significant. In fact, it turns out the local school district and their levies is much more than a quarter of my total property tax bill. And when I see increases, it's usually not from the county, it's usually from the school district, as far as if I see a significant increase on my actual tax bill. So the legislature does have the power to say how these taxing districts get funded. In fact, we have to understand that most things that exist in the state of Idaho are creations of the Idaho State Legislature. I'll give you a good example. Cities, like the city of Sandpoint, is a municipal corporation. Municipal corporations are not in the Idaho Constitution. They are literally created in Idaho Code. Idaho Code is created by the Idaho Legislature and the governor. So if we wanted to abolish the city of Sandpoint, we could do so tomorrow. Well, since we have the power as a legislature to create cities and to create these taxing districts, we also have the power as a legislature to say how these districts are going to be funded, including schools. And in fact, in schools' case, the Idaho legislature has an obligation in the Constitution to provide for a system of free, common public schools. And so we're going to have to provide as a state legislature for publicly accessible schools. It doesn't say that those schools need to be run by the government, by the way. They're free, common, talks about curriculum. Free means the legislature is going to pay for it. Public means that the public has access to it. Could be run by a private organization. Could be a charter, etc. But the point is, the legislature does get to say how these things are going to get funded. And so I do recommend, I got to touch something there. I do recommend that we look into, again, different way to fund even the schools, including whether there are going to be levies in the future. If we replace that whole funding stream with something other than the current property tax system, then I say we replace the whole funding stream so that they're not dependent upon levies either.
Okay. All right. Well, Scott, Mr. Herndon, excuse me, I appreciate you tuning in tonight And I'll give you the last word here in just a minute. Again, we are joined by future state senator Scott Herndon, who has spent some time talking about abortion, education, and property taxes, as well as budgets overall. So we appreciate you coming on tonight and join on episode 2. It's history in the making, I guess. So we're really excited and glad to have you on. But is there anything in closing that, over the next few months that if you have a message for Idahoans or a message for your constituents, what would that message be?
The main message would be, and this is what I want to leave people with, is Idaho we didn't even touch on this. We are a sovereign state. The states created the federal government. And so we need voters to understand and expect the state to operate independently of the federal government and make decisions that the federal government is incapable of making. We're facing a very high inflationary environment. We're going to be facing budget crises of both our state government and going into this inflationary environment. Most economists are looking at a recession possibility at this point. That's going to impact our pocketbook. It's going to impact the state budget. It's going to impact the federal budget. And Benjamin Franklin said that he told Mrs. Powell in Philadelphia after the Constitutional Convention, it's a republic if you can keep it. And what I want to leave people with is we need to know what kind of republic we're supposed to keep. This is the American Republic, the United States Republic. It's a 7-boundary republic with a federal government and a state government and the 3 different branches of government at both levels. It's not the Democratic Republic of North Korea. Okay, there's 2 totally different things. It's not Plato's republic. And so learn how your government works and then ask your government to work responsibly according to the design. There's a federal constitution and a state constitution. If you haven't read them, go ahead and read them. The federal constitution is not long. State constitution is a little longer. Get familiar with how this design is supposed to work and then start getting involved with your legislators, including me. And I can be reached at scott@herndonforidaho.com and at my website, herndonforidaho.com. Everybody can sign up for my newsletter on my website at herndonforidaho.com. Sign up and get in contact with me. I'd love to put forward good, conservative, liberty-loving principles in the Idaho State Legislature starting in January 2023.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Mr. Herndon, again, and thank you all for tuning in tonight. Be sure to share this video, give us a thumbs up, and be sure to subscribe to the Idaho Dispatch, idahodispatch.com/subscribe. Help support independent journalism and help us continue into the future doing stories, interviews, and everything else that a lot of the mainstream media does not want to touch. So, again, thank you again, Mr. Herndon, for joining us tonight.
You're welcome, Mr. Pruitt, and thanks for having me. It's been my pleasure to join you. Here's my thumbs up, by the way.
There you go. Take care, everybody.